Fellas, when it comes to UFC champions, for the majority of them, there's still a lot of unanswered questions, fights that they haven't got against, styles that they haven't seen yet, and just people that they haven't got against yet. So I'm going to be going through every single UFC champion and picking out a couple of questions I have for all of these champions. Not actually to the champions, but questions revolving their career, like I said, the styles that they haven't faced, questions that I have about all these fighters, especially the new champions who we haven't really seen compete at the top for the longest time. So I'm going to be going through every single UFC champion and a couple of questions that we just haven't seen answered revolving their careers that I think a lot of us want to see the answers to. And we'll just go straight in there with the heavyweight division with Jon Jones. Now, there's so many questions you can ask Jon Jones considering he's had such a long career and a lot of controversy. So the first question I would have for Jon Jones' career is how good would Jon Jones have been without performance-enhancing drugs? Now, obviously, Jon Jones is regarded by most as the greatest of all time. He's pretty much unbeatable in the UFC apart from a couple of scripts on his record, which, I mean, one of them was a DQ and then one of them was a no contest because he took steroids, which is the topic that we're talking about now. But like I said, he took steroids. That's why the no contest with DC was a no contest in the first place. It was because he got popped for steroids, and it's happened multiple times in his career. And how good would have Jon Jones been had he never taken steroids? Had he never injected himself with steroids? Because listen, I know people are going to say, he only got popped for the fights that he took steroids for the majority of his career where he's clean, but who knows that? For all we know, especially with the current state of Dana White, he's probably ordering people to inject every single steroid into Jon Jones just so that he can have the best chance of winning. And how many fights have Jon Jones, done in the UFC when he's taken steroids that we never knew about? A lot of people like to disregard people when they take steroids. They like to disregard Anderson Silva's legacy. They like to disregard Jon Jones' legacy. How good would he have done? And how dominant would he have been had he never taken steroids? Because it's not just in the fight that steroids help, it's also outside of the fight with recovery and everything like that. So how good would have Jon Jones' career been? Would he have been as dominant? Would he have been as great had he never taken performance-enhancing drugs? And again, for all we know, Dana White could be feeding Jon Jones steroids behind the scenes just to make his career look that much better, because obviously we know how much Dana White likes Jon Jones. So the first question, how good would he have been had he never taken steroids in his entire UFC career in and out of a fight camp? And then the second question I've got for Jon Jones is, how good would he do in the heavyweight division against guys like Tom Aspinall and Francis Ngannou? Now, obviously the next big fight is him versus Stipe, which, listen, it's going to be a big fight, but no MMA fan really wants to see that fight. No one really has that much interest in seeing Stipe compete against Jon Jones. The first fight that we all wanted to see was Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. This was the shit. Before Jon Jones bulked up to the heavyweight division when Ngannou was still the champion before he vacated, this was the mega fight of the UFC. You've got Francis Ngannou, the guy with improved takedown defense, unstoppable in the heavyweight division, dangerous hands, against the greatest of all time, Jon Jones, who's bulking up and making his heavyweight debut. This was the big fight that we all wanted to see. It's a massive, massive threat for Jon Jones. It would have been a massive win for him, and it's not like he's facing another one-dimensional guy like Cyril Gane. This was the fight that we all wanted to see. And again, we're never going to see this fight. Jon Jones basically waited until Ngannou left the UFC to bulk up to the heavyweight division, and now he said that the only fight he's going to have is against Stipe Miocic. And then obviously the other fight that we haven't seen him against is Tom Aspinall. The fight that should be next, the fight that still has a slight possibility of happening, but obviously Jon Jones is refusing it, because I feel like a majority of MMA fans are kind of just deciding that Tom Aspinall probably would beat Jon Jones. He's quicker, he's better in the heavyweight division, he's a lot faster. The resume that he's already put together in the heavyweight division, he's beaten 5 ranked opponents all in the first round as well, beating guys like Blades and Pavlovich when they were number 1 contenders. He's like I said, he's well-rounded, he's not just a one-dimensional fighter like Cyril Gane, so I feel like a lot of people would pick Aspinall to beat Jones, but at the end of the day, it's Jon Jones. But the problem is, we're never going to find out because Jones ain't ever going to find him. So those are the 2 questions I've got revolving Jon Jones' career. How good would he have been had he never taken steroids? And how would he have done if he was to compete against a guy like Tom Aspinall or Francis Ngannou, who in my opinion are the 2 biggest threats for Jones in the heavyweight division out of everyone there. So those are the questions for Jon Jones. Then we've got Alex Pereira. The first question I've got revolving Pereira's career is, how would he do against Ankalaev? Again, if Pereira wins his next fight and Ankalaev wins his next fight, they're probably going to get matched up against each other. But how would he actually do? Because he's matched up against Khalil Roundtree, and even though I think there's definitely worse fights in the division, it's not a fight that, most of us really want to see. So I think the question most of us want to see is him versus Ankalaev. Him against the biggest stylistic threat in the light heavyweight division, the guy who, rightfully deserves his top shot at the title. How would Alex Pereira do against Magomed Ankalaev? Because Ankalaev, he's a very difficult fight for Pereira. In fact, I would say stylistically, he is the most difficult fight for Pereira in the light heavyweight division. His only loss is to Paul Craig, which I guess is a bit of a bad loss when you look at it. But again, Paul Craig only beats good people. He's got hands as well. He's shown me multiple fights, even in his last fight against Johnny Walker. He's got knockout power. He's got good hands as Magomed Ankalaev, and obviously he's a great grappler, which seems to be Pereira's biggest kryptonite. So I think I'd love to see him against Ankalaev, and maybe we will get the answer to this question if they both win the next fights. But that's a question I've got revolving Pereira. And the second question is how much has his grappling improved. Again, we know that Pereira is not the best grappler in the UFC. He's shown it against Jan Blachowicz, he's shown it against Ilia Topuria, and he's still yet to face like a high level grappler. And even the strikers that he's gone against have kind of been able to expose his grappling. So how much has his grappling improved while working with Glover Teixeira? And again, it links back to the fight with Ankalaev, because I feel like that's the only fight where we're going to get the answer to that question when he does face a guy like Magomed Ankalaev, who, he can say whatever he wants on Twitter about wanting to stand up with Pereira, but he's going to shoot for a takedown. So those are the two questions. And then the third question revolving Alex Pereira is how would he do in the heavyweight division, because he had a pretty good, run in the middleweight division. Didn't have a long legacy, but he, knocked out Sean Strickland, finished Adesanya for the belt. Then he goes up to the light heavyweight division. He's put together a really good resume so far. Knocked out, obviously, Jamal Hill, knocked out Yuri twice, beat Jan Blachowicz, probably about to beat Khalil Roundtree as well. But how would he do in the heavyweight division against the likes of Tom Aspinall and Jon Jones and the other top contenders in the heavyweight division? So those are the three questions I've got revolving Alex Pereira. I think all of them could potentially get answered depending on who he gets matched up against. Then we've got Dricus du Plessis, guy who just won the belt. First question I've got for Dricus is his weird style actually calculated? Because it feels like everyone likes to mock Dricus du Plessis about having a terrible style. That's why when he was on his come-up, no one was really taking him seriously, because he looked like an absolute amateur out there. But is it actually calculated? Is his weird style actually effective? And even though it's weird, is it actually, is it actually something that works for his career? Because you look at his career in the UFC, it's pretty much flawless, apart from the very close decision with Strickland. He's had a really good UFC career. I mean, his last 3 wins have been against the 3rd greatest middleweight of all time, the 2nd greatest middleweight of all time, and the champion Sean Strickland at the time. So is he actually training this weird style, and is it actually something that's effective rather than him just, lacking the fundamentals and looking shit? Because it's obviously working for him, so I want to know if it's calculated. And then the next question I've got for Dricus du Plessis is, what is the nightmare style for Dricus? I'm still kind of confused if there's anyone in the middleweight division that's going to beat him. Who's it going to be? Because like I said, you go back to his record, he's faced a lot of different styles. He's faced a lot of strikers in guys like Adesanya, Strickland, Till, Whitaker, and I guess Brunson was a grappler as well. But I want to see how he faces against the grapplers like Chimaev and Jack Hermansson, Hernandez, Brendan Allen, just any high-level grappler in the middleweight division, because we're yet to see him face like a really high-level grappler. But I'd imagine that it's quite hard for a high-level grappler to beat Dricus du Plessis, because Dricus has amazing wrestling. He's had multiple submissions, got a submission in his last fight, gave Adesanya his first submission loss, and we know that Dricus is a good wrestler. So how would he do against a high-level grappler? And most importantly, what is a nightmare style for Dricus du Plessis? And that kind of ties into my question for Belal Muhammad. But the first question I've got for Belal Muhammad is, how long left does he have in his career? Now, obviously, he's the new welterweight champion of the world, just beat Leon Edwards, seems to be in the prime of his career, but the dude's 36 years old. It's a bit of a quick question, nothing really else I can add, but he's getting up there in age. He's nearly 40 years old, 36 and still holding the belt. How long left does Belal Muhammad have in his career? Does he want to be as active as possible? How good of a legacy can he build with the time that he's got in the space? That's the first question that I've got. The second question is similar to what I asked Dricus du Plessis. How does he do against other high-level grapplers? Because I know he's faced a few high-level grapplers, but the Gilbert Burns fight, I'm not making excuses for Burns. It's a fair and square win for Belal Muhammad, but he was injured in that fight, and he didn't really initiate grappling against Belal Muhammad. He tried keeping it on the feet. And they did face Sean Brady, but Sean Brady's kind of made, I'm going to eat my words this weekend, and he's not really that relentless. I want to see him against somebody like Shavkat Rakhmonov, who hopefully we see him against next. I want to see him against somebody like Kamaru Usman. I want to see how Belal Muhammad would do against someone else who actually imposes a high grappling pace. I'm not someone like Colby Covington, who calls himself a pressure wrestler, but hasn't pressured anyone since like 2020 when he fought Woodley or whatever it was. So for Belal Muhammad, how long left does he have in his career? How would he do against other high-level grapplers? Those are my questions for him, because I feel like there's still a lot of questions to be answered about Belal Muhammad, and that's why I hope we see him face Shavkat Rakhmonov next. Then we've got pound for pound number 1, Makhachev. The first question I've got for Islam Makhachev is, again, how would he do against a high-level wrestler? I'm not going to ask every single fighter this question, I promise, but again, I want to know how Makhachev would do against a high-level wrestler, because his career so far, you look at his last 8 fights, they've all been against strikers or non-grapplers. Poirier, striker. Volkanovski, striker. Bobby Green, striker. Dan Hooker, striker. Charles Oliveira, not a good wrestler, he's a jiu-jitsu artist. How would he do against someone like Arman Tsarukyan? I know he's faced Arman Tsarukyan before, but that was in Tsarukyan's debut. How would he currently do against Arman Tsarukyan? What would his approach be? Or even somebody like Michael Chandler, who's a great wrestler as well. Or I know people are going to mock me for saying this, but even Gamrot. I know Makhachev would probably more Gamrot, but I'm just intrigued to see what Makhachev's approach would be when he's facing another high-level grappler. So hopefully we can see him against Arman Tsarukyan in his next fight, so the question can be answered. The second question I've got for Makhachev is, how would he have performed against Leon Edwards at 170? This was a fight that everyone wanted to see a couple of months ago. Everyone was talking about how Makhachev would do against against Edwards. And I know ever since Edwards has lost to Belal Muhammad, people have kind of immediately written off Edwards in a fight against Islam Makhachev, but I still think it's a really testing fight for Islam Makhachev because it's a completely new division. It's a 170, Leon's weight class, and regardless of how he performed against Belal Muhammad, he is still an amazing striker as Leon Edwards, super technical, and he has got pretty much good takedown defense. I know he didn't really show in that fight with Belal Muhammad, but he has got pretty good takedown defense compared to the rest of the division, so I want to still know how Islam Makhachev would do against Leon. I'd probably favour Makhachev against Leon, especially after that performance against Belal, but it's still a question that I want to be answered when it comes to Leon and Islam Makhachev. And then the third question for Makhachev is how far can he take his career? Can he potentially become the greatest of all time, or at least one of the greatest of all time? Because, like I said, you look at his UFC career, he's had a pretty good UFC career. A lot of finishes. His only loss was a knockout from ages ago, a bit of a fluke. And he's pound for pound #1 in the UFC right now. And like I said, he's looked really good. He beat pound for pound #1 Alexander Volkanovski twice, one of them being a vicious knockout. He submitted the best at the time in Charles Oliveira. He submitted him at his own game. He beat Dustin Poirier, who's always been one of the best lightweights in the world. And I mean, if you look at the current state of the lightweight division, it doesn't really seem like there's any names that I would pick over Islam Makhachev. How far can he take this? How long is he going to be the champion? Can he get double champ, status? I know Belal Muhammad is a champion, so we probably don't want to move up, but how far can Islam Makhachev take his career? Those are the questions that I've got regarding Islam Makhachev. How far can he take his career? How would he do against a high-level wrestler? And how would he have performed had he been against Leon Edwards at 170? Then we've got Ilia Topuria. The first question is simply just revolving his next fight. Is he actually good enough to beat Max Holloway? Because this is probably the most intriguing fight in the UFC right now. Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway. I genuinely don't know who to pick. I've said this a million times. It's a 50-50 fight. And I just want to know if he's good enough to beat Max Holloway. Because Holloway has always been the second best featherweight in the world. Sometimes he's been the best. Whenever Volkanovski's been around, Holloway's always just cleared out everyone. So this is the first time that Holloway's going to be fighting for a belt in a while when it's not been against Alexander Volkanovski. I want to see how he'd do against Topuria. Because like I said, when it comes to everyone in the featherweight division outside of Volk, Holloway seems to smoke him. So is he actually good enough to beat Holloway? Second question I've got is, listen, this might seem like I'm coping a little bit, but would he have beat prime Volkanovski? Because you can say that I'm coping or whatever, but Volkanovski definitely wasn't in the best state when he faced Ilia Topuria. He'd come off that quick knockout over Islam Makhachev, returned pretty quickly against Ilia Topuria, a dangerous contender, and he'd lost by knockout. I want to see the Volkanovski that was smoking guys like Brian Ortega, Korean Zombie, Max Holloway the third time around. I want to see that Volkanovski. The one that seemed like he was on his best game. I want to see Ilia Topuria face that version of Volkanovski. Would Topuria have beaten prime Volkanovski? Not the one that was mentally drained. Not the one that was coming off a fresh KO loss to Islam Makhachev. Not the one that had lost, 2 out of his last 3. I want to see how Topuria would have done against that the prime version of Volkanovski over that version. So yeah, those are the questions for Ilia Topuria. Then I've got Sean O'Malley. The first question I've got for Sean O'Malley is, how does he perform against a higher pressure wrestler like Merab or Umanswered? Now, I know he's faced a wrestler before. He faced Aljamain Sterling, but Sterling shot for, I think, 1 takedown in that entire fight. There was a lot of feeling out going on in that fight. And compared to a guy like Umanswered or even just like a Merab, there's no way that Sean O'Malley's... there's no way that Aljamain Sterling's anywhere near as high pressure. Merab is a very high pressure wrestler. I'm pretty sure he set a record in that fight with PTN. He out-wrestled a wrestler as decorated as Henry Cejudo. We know he's one of the best in the division. And Umanswered was able to out-wrestle one of the most dangerous and well-rounded dudes in the division in Corey Sandhagen, and has pretty much looked unstoppable with his wrestling so far. I want to see how Sean O'Malley performs against Merab and Umanswered, because we can talk about Sean O'Malley having really good takedown defense, but even in that fight a couple of fights ago against PTN was having, pretty much a lot of success when it came to grappling. And PTN, that same dude that got dominated by Merab, how would Sean O'Malley do against somebody like Merab? So that's the first question I've got for Sean O'Malley. The second one is, will he become the greatest bantamweight of all time? I think a lot of MMA fans right now would consider Dominic Cruz the greatest bantamweight of all time. He's had a lot of title wins in the UFC, a record of 24-4, even more wins if you count his career in WEC, which is practically the UFC for bantamweights back in the day. And most people would regard Dominic Cruz as the greatest of all time, but I think Sean O'Malley has a good chance of overtaking him, because Sean O'Malley's 18-1. That only loss was pretty much an injury loss to Marlon Vera, and even though he's only got 1 defense so far and 2 title wins, if he can go out there and beat Merab in his next fight, and if he can go out there and beat Umanswered as well, it's going to be hard to argue that Sean O'Malley doesn't have potential to be the greatest bantamweight of all time with the way that his career is going. So That's the first question. That's the second question I've got for Sean O'Malley. It's kind of crazy how a couple of years ago, people weren't really taking Sean O'Malley seriously. People just saw him as like this big name who was never going to be anything special. And now he's getting mentioned with some of the bantamweight gods. And then the third question is, would he beat Ilia Topuria again? I don't want to see that fight until I see him get past someone like Merab or Umar Nurmagomedov. But assuming that he does get past Merab or Umar, how would he do against Ilia Topuria? A fight that's kind of been talked about, not that's going to happen soon. And again, Topuria needs to beat Holloway and O'Malley needs to beat Merab and Umar Nurmagomedov. But when we see Sean O'Malley beat these contenders, they seem to be pretty one-dimensional guys. Marlon Vera, striker, Merab, grappler, they seem to be fairly one-dimensional. Whereas Topuria, I mean, apart from being this unstoppable guy in the featherweight division that's beating everyone, he's pretty well-rounded. He submits grapplers, he knocks out strikers. He's a very dangerous guy, Topuria. And I think Topuria versus Sean O'Malley, if that fight was to ever happen, it would intrigue me as much as a fight like Holloway and Topuria. So how would Sean O'Malley do against Topuria if he was theoretically to move up to the featherweight division? Again, we need to see how their careers play out in the next few years, but those are the three questions for Sean O'Malley. And then finally for Pantoja. First question I've got for Pantoja is, how beatable really is it? Because everyone, including myself, like to talk about how beatable Pantoja looks, how close these decisions are that he's having, but how beatable really is it? Because we can call him beatable, we can call him beatable all we want, but he's on a bit of a streak. Completely multiple styles have faced Pantoja so far. None of them have been able to get past him. And again, that kind of ties into my second question. Who realistically beats Pantoja? Because again, we can talk about how beatable he is and how close these fights that he's having are, but he's cleared out the flyweight division. Like, I know his title run hasn't been the longest. He's only got 2 defenses. But you look at the people that he's beaten in the flyweight division. He's beaten a good chunk of the flyweight division. I'm pretty sure out of every champion right now, he has cleared his division out more than anyone. Again, not all of them were title wins, but the resume that he's already put together and the amount of people that he's already faced in the flyweight division is crazy. So who actually realistically beats him? Is it somebody like Amir Albazi who's going to pose a grappling threat? Would it have been somebody like Muhammad Makhachev? Is it going to be a Tatsuro Taira? Is it going to be the dude, I forgot his name, the Japanese dude who's moving from that other MMA promotion? Who is it that's going to be Alexandre Pantoja? Because we can call him beatable. No one's been able to do it. So those are the questions that I would have revolving every UFC champion's career. Asking questions about their styles, the fighters that they haven't gone against, and overall just questions for every UFC champion. So let me know if you would have any personal questions for any UFC champions in their careers. What would it be? And thank you for watching.